Welcome back to Let's Talk Race and Model. I'm your host, Harrison Paul. We are going to discuss the fact that Coulter, a very racist and confused woman, got an interview with Vivek Ramaswamy, and I think they were obviously aiming to have an interview that would be very triggering for people, but really it's not as triggering as they would have liked it to be because we already know who they are, so there's nothing. We're more so focused on the people who then at the end of the day show their true colors rather than people who their true colors have been showing the whole time. So I didn't really jump on it from a perspective of like, let me get onto it because it's talking news, and it was a little bit of news for a moment, but of course it blew over. I more hopped on it because I was, looking for something to watch today, and I came up on my, my explore page of YouTube, and I decided to watch it. And when I did, I realized they were talking about nationalism and what that is, right? Vivek tries to have a very, I don't know what it is, what you can call it, but his introduction was, we can no longer say the N-word, blah, blah, blah. He thinks he's very clever.
There's an N-word that you're not allowed to say anymore, but I'm going to say it. Nationalist.
And I actually think he's one of the, probably, in fairness to him, one of the most clever fools. And anybody who knows him will know that. A lot of, knowledge, or rather a lot of information, but very little depth, very little character, very little wisdom. Just really someone who I don't see strength in him. I see him as a follower. I don't see him being able to go against the tide no matter where it went, but rather to be accepted by a certain group of people is what he lives and dies for and stands on. So he has gained all of his information in order to best suit or impress the people he's trying to impress. But we'll see how far it takes him. So this is about nationalism, and I really do believe that there was something quite interesting for us to discuss here as they discuss this. So I'm going to play a little bit of it, but you guys should go and watch it because I'm not even sure I'm about to play all of what I heard, but I'm just going to play this little section for you guys to understand what we're going to talk about.
On one end of our nationalist movement, a libertarian nationalist movement, that says that, you can subscribe to the ideals of this country, that you should achieve anything you want, and you're equally American as long as you pledge allegiance to those ideals. But I think a subtext and a strain on the other side that's skeptical of that. That says, we should be open to using government as an instrument to advancing pro-nationalist ends. And there is a difference in how American you really are, depending on how long you've been here. And I think we ought to smoke that discussion out and have that open dialogue in a way that's been uncomfortable because of the Overton window that we accept around these topics. And I think we would be best served taking a truck and driving it through that Overton window so we can actually have an honest discussion about the future of where the conservative movement is headed from here, not just on the issue of national identity or nationalism or immigration, but more broadly. And that's why I brought on today somebody who I think has some thoughtful perspectives on the future direction of our country, of our conservative movement, and on this question of nationalism and national identity, somebody I've been fascinated by for a long time and have interacted with on social media, but for the first time we're having at least live form conversation in the offline sense of it. It's Ann Coulter. So Ann, thanks for coming on, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. Thanks for having me. That was a fantastic opening monologue. I too am a fan of yours. So I'm going to make a point of disagreeing with you so that it will be fun. You are so bright and articulate, and I guess I can call you articulate since you're not an American Black. Can't say that about them. That's derogatory. And that was a great opening segment. Lots of things to talk about there. Oh, and I agreed with many, many things you said during, in fact, probably more than most other candidates when you were running for president. But I still would not have voted for you because you're an Indian. We'll get back to that. And it's directly related to what you were just talking about. The thing about nationalism, you're totally right. It is like to use the word nationalism. Oh, it's Hitler, it's Hitler. And Hitler had soup. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have soup. Hitler loved dogs. That doesn't mean you shouldn't love dogs. So I think we have to move past this. If Hitler did it, it must be bad.
I want to discuss this for a minute. And they go on to discuss about how they feel, or she feels that, it should be really grounded in someone who comes deeply from the culture and the grassroots of that culture and of that nation. Now, where I sympathized with that opinion, I found myself sympathizing at the beginning of this podcast. But what frustrates me the most about this, and of course, I have to be honest and ask myself, okay, well, wouldn't you want an African man to be the president of Africa? Wouldn't you want, would you trust, or rather, would you trust somebody else to be the president of your country more, or your nation, or, your continent more than you would trust an African to do so? And I was trying to sympathize from that perspective. Like, in an ideal world, we have an African repping, Africa, and a true African, Africans, or should I say, each country in Africa truly representing Africa from a perspective of he's representing something that really runs in his bloodline, rather than just something that he adopted, or it could be, it could feel fickle. It could feel like this is how he's feeling right now, but it could feel more like he has skin in the game when someone's great grandfather was from Ghana, or great, and he is now carrying the mantle on behalf of a family line. I had to be honest with myself and say, I can think of it from that perspective. But the perspective that I don't like, and I was thinking of this again to contextualize this in terms of Ireland and what we are going through in Ireland, and there's a whole nationalist movement at the moment where ethno-nationalism, which really that is showing its head in Ireland at the moment. This belief that Ireland only belongs to the Irish, and what that means. And although you try to sympathize with these people, I definitely do think that they're taking it too far, where it is the likes of Gavin Pepper, who are running at the moment, are quite saying, if you're not, you probably shouldn't even be here. Or at the very least, I think they're posing as if we will let you, we don't mind you being here if you work or whatever. But I definitely do think that when someone has a mentality like that, you're bound to make people who are even living amongst the laws and everything live in a very oppressive, state. It's quite like Rishi Sunak taking off sick notes, because you now start to scrutinize everyone, and someone who generally probably is sick now, is being ill-treated when you remove stuff like that. So you run the risk of disrespecting people, and I feel like that's kind of the same context, or the same idea when you think about African people. The ones who are hardworking, the ones who are vetted, ended up being ill-treated because of that, umbrella of just like Ireland for the Irish. Well, how far does that go, and how do you monitor the ones who are going too far? And I don't think there's an intent to do so. I don't think there's an intent to monitor the ones who are. I think there is an intent to let the people run free. And at the end of the day, if someone is killed or someone dies, you just say, oh, sorry, our thoughts are with the family, and not really have much to say about it. But at the end of the day, we just, so I do think that this willfully and this purposefully been a recklessness in all the slogans that are happening in this time within Ireland. But I'm thinking about the concept of a black man becoming the president of Ireland, or rather the Taoiseach or any stuff like that, and thinking about what that means. And my idea for this is understanding that we cannot act like, historical, and even current day events have not shaped the world that we live in today. And in fact, I'm actually going to play a video that I've been liking a lot, and I've been quoting it actually a lot, but I'm just going to take a moment to play the video here. I'm only going to play the tail end of the video, but the guy was actually talking about Elon Musk, and how Elon Musk is really just calling for people to just stop talking about racism without, any sort of empathy towards the the fact that he himself is a child of a man who got rich off of, apartheid, and got rich off of using, as South Africans as human labor, free labor. So it's rich now that he is asking and saying we should just stop talking about it, when the world we live in today, the world his normality was shaped by those times directly. It's not like great grand directly. Apartheid was his father directly. So I want to play the ending, because I really love the ending to this.
And directing their anger towards the people who actually deserve it. That being said, there is something inherently insidious about the desire to remove the issue of race when it comes to talk of how today's Western economic supremacy came to exist in the first place. We don't get to do that. We don't get to pretend that we think that the past had nothing to do with shaping the present.
And that's just something that I really loved when he said that. We don't get to do that. We don't get to pretend like the past had nothing to do with shaping the present. And also, I would also like to add, we don't get to pretend like the fact that the present is currently being shaped, especially with a nation like America or even European nations. We, and I was even explaining to someone quite recently, we are probably forcing ourselves not to recognize the fact that there is a reason, there's an incentive that is taking place when, foreigners, or rather immigrants from Africa. I want to speak specifically from Africa, because I understand that better than anything else, and that is not out of the goodness of anybody's heart. The European Union make sure that people within the European Union have these incentives, because there's a lot more that they benefit from, taking from Africa, that I guess creating more leverage by taking more refugees that you created with the instability and the wars and the tragedies that you create. So it's a circle of life, isn't it? Comes full circle, isn't it? And really, they get to remain in control in that dynamic between Africa and the West, and that is so important for them. And I understand why, if you think about it from a business standpoint. They're taking so much money. Like right now, we're fortunate enough. I have lights, I have a whole set, I have a whole camera here, I have microphone, anything built with the minerals that come from Africa. So a world where the West actually has to approach Africa with respect, and asking them if really where they have the power in their hands. That creates really life as we know it will completely shift and change in a way where I don't even think it's even conceivable how difficult it would be for a Western world now to move forward and to grow as they have been growing. So they hang on for dear life, and they're willing to do anything. And when we think about the wars and we think about what's happening in Congo, really there's so much on the line that it could drive people to become the most disgusting people and the most manipulative people, which is what we see today, where they manipulate to make Africa seem like we need Africa more than Africa needs the West, in order to keep this dynamic, because this dynamic is really what they need in order to continue having this quote unquote developed first world in the West. And I hate the fact that we have all this, truths about today's world and history, and Africans have been displaced really for the longest time. Our homes have been upended, historical reasons, everything that. And then when we, flee our places, whatever, we are then told we have little entitlement to where we are now stationed. So we have African Americans who were brought there as slaves, and then they're still less likely to become a president in comparison to a white man. And then we are forced to parade a mixed race man, which is Obama. And I want that to be put down there, because you have to understand how sad that moment was, that we had to salvage a half-black man as our representative, because we didn't even think that would ever be you know what I mean, doable, and it happened, right? So Obama really is just someone who people who are kind of thinking, wow, is this the light at the end of the tunnel? We never thought this could happen for us. And even as Africans, and it's sad that imagine that, after you were brought there as slaves. And I feel like I relate a lot to the African Americans, and I'm so happy that I do, because I always noticed that everyone would always try and say, oh no, well, the Americans, they're there by force and your story is different. Really? Is it really different? Is it different? Not really. When you make conditions in Africa unlivable, when you put Zimbabwe, for example, when my mom left Zimbabwe, we were on sanctions for trying to take land back that was ours in the first place. And it got really bad. In fact, Zimbabwe was the fastest growing economy before those sanctions. And they tell you, the story in which they tell you why the sanctions took place, it's completely false. There was the Lancaster Agreement where they told, Zimbabweans they would get house and they would get land back. And, of course, like we always say, this is why I'm anti play the game. If you play the game, you will know. That's what some of our greats like Mugabe thought, if I play the game, eventually things will work out for me. And that man really found out that, and I have an episode on this. I'll put up on the screen. It's a very insightful episode. You should go and watch it. But, when you look at it from an empathetic way where, you think about you, my brother who's watching this, or my sister who's watching this, you're in a workplace and you think, okay, the best way to maneuver in this workplace is to assimilate or figure this out. And that is what the president of independence, the independence presidents thought, okay, listen, we're no longer slaves. Let us figure out how we can fix up our talk. And that's the way that they thought they were going to climb, in this new world trade, UN, world trade organizations and all these things that were going on, and how they were going to be, stand tall and be counted in that big ring. It was assimilating. Like you in work. This is why I've learned a lot from not being so, I guess, narrow-minded, I want to say, or just like, I contextualize this, our leaders and everything in, like you and I as Black people. And we really do think that they have been void of the challenges that we faced with white people, and we faced in the workplace, and we faced, and they were facing that in the big ring. They were also Black people who were trying to be considered enough, competent, everything. So, they also felt like, okay, I don't want to show too much strength, because then I come off as an angry chip on my shoulder Black person who's still hanging on to the past. They had to overcome those hurdles of being guilt tripped into those corners and being manipulated in those corners, and thinking, okay, the best way would be to fix up my talk. And then you have someone who realized, like Mugabe, I'm not getting this land back, am I? Although an agreement was made. So then he tells the Zimbabweans to go and grab the land. He says it in a very underhanded way, and they punish him for that. And this is what I'm trying to say. So then my family leaves Zimbabwe because of this reason. So if you ask yourself the question of like, oh, you weren't forced to come here, but the very people who, the Americans, the Americans and the British and that same colonial, ruling, are the ones who caused the problems that made my home really unlivable. So my families will go, and we can think about Congo, we can think about all these places very much alike. Even in, I was talking to a brother quite recently about what's going on in Nigeria, and I will do an episode on that, but I've got so much I'm trying to get through here. But talking about how Nigeria really is still owned by the British, right? And it was a British regime, and it's always been, and really it will always be until there's a real revolution. So when you think about it like this, how they don't create, it's not about the flourishing of Nigeria, really. It's about the real owners of it being, the West and Britain being still people who can siphon money from that. How then when we arrive here are we told that, it should be about nationalism and it should be about a purebred, or it should be about that's my problem. Because it feels like Western countries, Western world want to have their cake and eat it. They want to go and invade other countries. They want to go and destroy other countries. They want to go and be, that be the reason, the cause, historically and even current day, of just pure, crime. You know what I mean? Crime on, I want to say, humanitarian crimes, on countries like Africa, nations like Africa, and within Africa, and then of course I want to say the colonial term Middle Eastern as well. They have interests within these places, and they completely upend it. And I feel like Ireland, to contextualize it for us, has definitely been complicit in that also. And they benefit from it. Anyone in the EU benefits from the detriment of Africa. You have to care enough to want to learn about this, or you'll think that's not the case. Even Britain really thought they would stand without the EU, and look how they're doing. If you ever want to know how well they're doing from Brexit, the guy who loves to shout about it is James O'Brien. He will let you know the country has really, really felt leaving it, the EU, and because there's benefits from being in the EU, because of its colonial relationship with Africa. So that's my problem when it comes to nationalism. It's like, us as Africans, I'm very torn. We made a lot of places our home. We made Ireland our home, made UK our own home, made America our home, made all these places our home. And now when we are told that, oh, by the way, you only have a certain amount of entitlement, or it really makes us, and kind of like bastard children in a way, which is a horrible, horrible feeling, because it's like, and then of course the way the media plays a part in it, where we just self-blame because we just see it as our own fault, right? But I'm gonna play one more clip, which is quite from the same guy, and he's going to give you a little bit of insight on just something special that he said. I think that, you guys should check it out, right? I'm going to play it here.
Tell me the biggest lie an adult has ever told you.
They told me poor countries were poor because they had corrupt leaders, but they didn't explain how those leaders came into power. They didn't explain that the form that corruption usually took was highly beneficial to Western economic interests, trading away their country's natural wealth and resources to Western corporations for pennies on the dollar, robbing their fellow citizens in exchange for Western assistance in seizing that power in the first place. They told me money makes the world go round, but they didn't explain how that works, that the money doesn't actually have any inherent value. It derives its value from the wealth of resources that money represents. They didn't explain that when you perpetually overproduce and overconsume to stimulate the economy, you're wasting real finite wealth in order to create symbolic wealth that derives its value from the very resources you're wasting in order to create it in the first place. They told me the Western world was a bastion of freedom and democracy and prosperity, but they failed to mention that that prosperity was built through the wasteful, deliberate overconsumption of other people's wealth, obtained through centuries worth of deliberate, active, maliciously creative destabilization.
I really do love white people like this, and I'm not settling for any other type. And I may seem like a complete bad guy to anybody who's not at this thinking level. And that's because I operate off of recklessness. Unless you think at that capacity, you will not understand me. Unless you are awake to these facts of life, you will think that I'm complaining about things that don't really matter. But that's because your knowledge really has, I guess, blocked you from really seeing the angle in which I'm speaking from. But there's another thing that Coulter said on the show. she said, "Oh, Africa is more than corrupt," and it's this thing where it's like, "Oh, Africa's corrupt." It's like this, narrative, this thing. Oh, we all know Africa's corrupt. Yeah, we all know like that cousin that that does drugs. Oh yeah, we all know the crazy one, that crazy, and it's like. I'm so happy I came to a place where I was kind of like, my family and I that we're no longer going to just subscribe to this. Yeah, the dumb cousin, the one who's just always, and then we have accepted. Oh yeah, that's us. That's just who we are. When we've actually been the scapegoat. That has been the scapegoat for crime, malicious destabilization. I love how he said that. And then on top of it all, we are not given the liberties where we then come to for freedom and to excel and to find a better life. Then at the end of the day, then a kid knows that, okay, I'm still a second-class citizen here. Why don't you go back to Africa? Oh, my home is in tatters. You're too embarrassed to say that. So you're then forcing yourself to be Irish or forcing yourself to be American, or forcing the Irish accent. And this is what I speak to at the moment, is speaking to that, that gray area, that place of where we're struggling with identity. So yeah, the light has gone off. Don't know why, but yeah, I might as well close it off there. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And I'm on a mission for you.